Okay. So again, you guys already have notes on 1, 2, and 3. Is there any of that you want me to redo or re-talk about? Are we good with long or synthetic division? Does anyone want me to just do one just to double check?
We like review.
Let's review it. Should we do you want to do long and synthetic or just synthetic? Or just long?
Simply synthetic.
Okay, long division is a little special, so if like that's gonna be a skill that I will specifically ask you, but we will be doing a lot with synthetic division in the next couple days, including later today. So let's start there. So first thing I want to remind you is when we do synthetic division, I need to put the factor inside, like by itself off in its own little house. So this number 2, x is going to be equal to 2. X is going to be equal to 2. Okay, you could work, that would be great. See what I'm talking about? And then I feel crazy because it worked for the guy in technology, but now it's not working. Okay. It wasn't like working at my house though, but it should work there. So I have to put 2, that factor, like in its own little house off to the side. And then I'm going to do all of the coefficients of my, like expression that I'm dividing it by. So I've got 2x to the third, 4x squared, negative x, and 1. So I carried all those coefficients down. Now, when I go from there, I have to take my like first number and I carry that down below the line. So I carry that first 2 down below the line. Then I take that 2 and I multiply it by the 2 that's in the house. So I multiply the number under the line with the number in the house. And then that number is going to go up here. So 2 times 2 is 4. So I get to write 4 here. Every time I teach this, you guys are like, do I add, do I subtract? How do I combine them? Just think about like whatever signs they are, combine them that way. So 4 and 4 becomes an 8. Now I'm going to do 2 times 2 and or 2 times 8 this time. And that number is going to go here. So that's going to be 16. So 16 goes there. Combine those, negative 1 and 16 is 15. Again, now I'm going to do 2 times that 15. 2 times 15 is 30. And that number comes up here. What's up? Yeah. Good. You could write 31R. Now that we're in pre-cal, we're going to write it a little bit differently. So we're going to do when we rewrite this, go down an exponent. So we were at x to the third. So we're going to come down to x squared. So it'll be 2x squared plus 8x plus 15. And again, you probably could write 31R or R31 maybe. The more correct mathematic way is making it a fraction and putting that remainder on top and then putting that factor on the bottom. X minus 2.
So you want me to take off?
I will probably take off that. Yeah, just because I want you to really know that. The reason I wanted to practice synthetic division today is because we're going to use that, okay? Are we okay with how we can find the different remainders? Remember, you can divide or you can plug in. And I actually might write that here. One way is synthetic division. The other way is to plug in. And if it goes in equally, it will equal 0. So if a factor, it will equal 0. And that's something that we're going to do in a little bit. No, the next part says revisit 2.32 F and G, which we skipped earlier. So we are going to go back to it. We're ready to talk about it, but kind of not. I have to give you a little bit of a hint before we do anything. So scroll back on up through your notes. We're just going to F and G. You guys did this part without me, right? Okay, I don't know why that's erased. Must have erased more than I thought. Okay. That's all right. So we're going to come here and I will tell you on this, I am going to have to give you a hint before we do anything else. Okay. So I'm going to give you a hint and that hint is that one of our zeros is 1. Okay. If you were given nothing else before this, I would have gone to the calculator and plugged it in to see what was going on. This time though, I'm going to give you a hint and we are going to figure out what my 0 is based on the fact that my hint is 1. Okay. Now, because my hint is 1, if I do my synthetic division, I should get all the way out to 0. And that's gonna give me like my factored form. We're gonna have to divide this 1 out. So we're dividing by x equals 1 to find the next expression, and that will give me the chance to get more zeros, okay? So we're gonna start with that. The first thing we're gonna do here is divide. So we're gonna take our, seriously, we're gonna take 1 and we're gonna put it in our box. We're gonna do our synthetic division, okay? So I'm gonna do that off to the side just so I have a little bit of room. So I'm gonna go 1 in my box.
It's not gonna be -1.
It's not gonna be -1 because I told you x equals 1. I didn't tell you my factor is x plus 1. So my factor would be x minus 1, switch that sign, but we're gonna put it in the box as +1. And we'll have 1, -7. Okay, this is just not going well for me. We're gonna avoid this. We're just gonna use the crappy back of the pen, so I'm sorry, my handwriting will be kind of trash for the rest of today. Okay, so we'll go 1, -7, -49, and 55. And hopefully you guys are faster at dividing than I am, so you're already synthetically dividing. Reminder, we are on new stuff, so everybody should be with me. So I'm at -6, -6 becomes -55. Which it might have alarmed me that I had such big numbers, but it does work out all the way to the end where I get 0. No remainder. So when I rewrite this, I now have x squared minus 6x minus 55. And this is kind of what's leading us into the rest of today. We're gonna keep doing this, and I want to factor that if I can, or divide again in order to simplify. And I believe that's a pretty easy lesson, a pretty easy factor. So if I factor this out, what are 2 numbers that multiply together to be -55 and add together to be -6? What was it? 11 and 5, good. What's positive, what's negative? -11, +5. Okay, so I told you one of the zeros was 1. Now my other 2 zeros come from this factored form. My other zeros are going to be +11 and -5. So 11 and -5 are my other 2 zeros. We were unable to factor this before because I could not factor something crazy like that. So instead, we were able to use our synthetic division, which I had to teach you in order for us to do this. And now we're gonna graph this graph. We have our zeros right here. And then I can identify, is this positive or negative, even or odd? What's going on with this graph? It's positive and then even or odd. It's gonna be odd. Why is it odd? Who said odd?
It's you.
Good, because it's cubed, good. Remember that when it's written in factor form, like x plus 2, x minus 3, x plus 5, that's when you count your x's. So if you said even, I like your idea, but we don't count our x's here, just look at the biggest one. So it's gonna be positive odd. So we're gonna go graph our zeros and then we're gonna graph positive odd. So take a second. I want positive 11, -5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. -5, +1, +11. The hint counts as a 0. And then it's positive odd, so that means that I'm gonna go in opposite directions. And it's gonna end going. So that's my graph.
How do you know, like the bounds or like stuff like that?
Good, bounce happens if you have the 0 listed twice, and I don't have any 2s of the same zeros. All my 3 zeros are different. So no bounce there. Let me do attendance before I forget about it. Okay, if I look at the next one, I am gonna tell you my hint for the next one is that x equals 2. So can you go ahead and start on that one? Can you do your synthetic division? See if you can factor it out to get hint x equals 2. No, you were not gonna know that unless I told you that. So I want to make sure that you knew that before I started to pause and take attendance.
It's 2, is that good enough?
That goes in the house. Mhm. It's not here today. I think everybody else is. Two in the house, divide it out, and then you should be able to easily factor that next part as well. I've got mine synthetically divided out, then I was able to take that answer and factor it down, so now I have all of my zeros. Does anybody have any questions on the dividing or the factoring? Once we have our zeros, we're gonna go graph those, and then we're gonna be able to do our positive, negative, even, odd kind of stuff. I'll leave this up on the board for one more second for anybody still checking. I'm gonna go graph my zeros now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 2, 4, 6. And is this one positive or negative? Even or odd? Odd, very good. Oh, good. Pretend like that goes.
No one's going to positive, negative, I'm just looking at.
Good, we're looking at that very first term. Very good. All right, good. So we just practiced some graphing. We practiced a couple that we could not factor out. Now, a lot of what we do after this is kind of this whole step as is, okay? So we're gonna take that same process and we're gonna keep going back down here. We're gonna pick up on number 5. It says find all zeros exact, okay? So that means no decimals, no nothing like that. So there may be some square roots and that's okay. However, these are all real numbers. We're gonna start talking about imaginary numbers next class. Okay, now I'm gonna do a couple steps off to the side, which is gonna be helpful on what we are thinking of every time we find the zeros, okay? So first thing I want to do when we find these zeros is if you can factor or if you can solve it like a quadratic, I want you to do that first. So the first step I'm gonna say is like factor. We're gonna see if we can factor it out first, okay? Do not make it harder than it has to be. Okay? Now, before I even go to step 2, let's go to the first one. Let's go to 5A and see can we factor that out, okay? I know it's 4 parts. We can still split it in half. We're gonna do our grouping here. So we are gonna group it together and we're gonna factor it that way, okay? So I like to remind you, always, always, always look to factor. We wanna work smarter, not harder. Okay, I'm gonna teach you other steps that we will have to use sometimes, but right now we're just gonna factor that out. So it looks like I can take n x squared out of the first 2 and I get 2x minus 3. And the second 2 I can take out a -2 and I'm left with 2x minus 3. Which is great. And because of the way factoring goes, since these 2 are the same, they get to come together to just be 1. And then that x squared minus 2 gets to come together to be 1. I was helping someone the other day and they wanted to make that 2x minus 3 squared. That's not how it works. Because it's written twice, that's why we're allowed to do grouping, okay? So it's not squared, it's just as is. Okay, now that it's in factored form, I've got this times this, we can set each factor equal to 0 and we can solve for our zeros. So do x squared minus 2 equals 0? and 2x minus 3 equals 0. Okay, when I do x squared minus 2 equals 0, I add 2 to both sides, so I get x squared equals 2. And then I'm going to square root both sides in order to solve. What is the square root of 2? Just the square root of 2, right? Don't forget to put a plus or minus in front of it, okay? So when we add that square root in, you need to add that plus or minus. Good, so I've got 1 0 here, or I guess I have 2 plus or minus root 2, positive or negative root 2. And then we can do the other one set equal to 0. So I could do 2x minus 3 equals 0, so 2x equals 3, and then x equals 3x. That's it. Those are my zeros. Those are your answers. We found all the zeros. So sometimes it's that basic. You just factor it and you solve for x just like normal, okay? Now, if I go to look at the next one, even though it has 4 parts, could I do grouping on this one?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, what do we take out of the first one? Okay. And then I get x plus 1. And then what do I take out of the next one? Okay, and so I get x or 4x plus 3. Can I keep going? No, because these gotta match, right? I love that we tried it, but this time it doesn't work, okay? So that means you can either erase it or you can just cross it off and be like, didn't work, I tried, love that we tried. Now, if factoring doesn't work, we need to do something called the PRRs. PRR, sorry, it looks like a kindergartner wrote it, but PRR. Outside of this little box, just because I want to keep my steps nice and organized, down here underneath it, I'm going to write PRR and tell you what PRR means. So PRR stands for possible rational roots. Does that sound like something you guys did before? Okay, great. I don't expect you to have seen that before, but I like to ask. Possible rational roots. This is us making a list of possible numbers that could work, okay? And it comes from P and Q. We label them as P and Q. So I did P over Q. Oh, Alea's like, oh, it's starting to ring a bell. Plus or minus P over plus or minus Q. The P stands for all of the factors of my constant. And then Q stands for the factors of my leading coefficient. Okay. So I've got P over Q. If I look at letter B, which one is my constant? Let me highlight that pink. Which one's my constant?
1.
Not 1. Constant has no x's. -6. Good. Constant has no x's. So my P, my numbers that multiply to be 6 are going to go on top. And then in yellow, I'll highlight my Q, my leading coefficient. What's my leading coefficient? This time it's my 1. It's my leading number. The 3 there is your exponent, and then 1 is my leading coefficient. Okay, so let's go list our PRRs. And I like to label them PRR, so I know what I just made a list of. Okay. First, we're gonna do factors of 6. So what are some things that multiply to be 6? 2, 3, 6, and 1. Good. You can list them in whatever order you want. I'm gonna do them in numerical order. So I did 1, 2, 3, and 6. Don't forget a plus or minus in front of all of them. And to just kind of keep my colors in line, this is my factors of my constant. This is my P. My Q then is my factors of my leading coefficient. What are the numbers that multiply to be 1? Just 1. So we'll write 1 plus or minus.
Is that a division sign?
Division. Yep, it's a big fraction. You might have done this last year. Macy, you think so? Yeah. You didn't call them PRRs? Call them something else.
I just remembered because I didn't hear.
It's okay, no one will tell anybody. I'll ask Mrs. Hollis what you guys called it, but we call it PRRs in pre-cal. Now, what I wanna do is just simplify it, because writing it as a big fraction is kind of confusing. Basically, we're taking each number and dividing by one, so 1 divided by 1, 2 divided by 1, 3 divided by 1, 6 divided by 1. Well, anything divided by 1 is just itself, so when I make the list of this, it's this time just the list of plus or minus 1, 2, 3, and 6. Now, if we do have a number on the bottom, which we will at some point, we'll have some fractions, but we'll deal with that when we have to deal with it, okay? Okay, the reason we make PRRs is this is where I like get my hint from. One of these numbers at least is going to be a root, it's gonna be a 0. One of these is gonna be a 0, and we don't know which one it is, okay? Now, normally, just for sake of time, we're not gonna go find it, I'm gonna tell you about which one it is and we'll double check that it works. Normally, we would start at the beginning and we'd do, okay, let's try +1, does that work? If not, then we're gonna try -1. If that doesn't work, then we'll try +2, if that doesn't work, try -2. I'm gonna tell you though, if we were to do that, we'd have to go all the way to 3, and I'm just, -3, and I'm just not doing that today, okay? So we're gonna do -3 is going to be the answer, okay? The way you find it is the same way as finding the remainder. You can either do synthetic division, or you can plug it in and you wanna get 0, okay? It doesn't matter to me which one you do. However, I will tell you that we need to do synthetic division eventually, so most of the time I just do synthetic division from the get-go. Okay, so we would have tried all of them, but we're just gonna go directly to -3, okay? So I'm gonna put -3 in my house. And that's gonna be my next step. So I remember on the steps, I said factor and then I said PRR. I'm gonna go back up to my steps and now I'm gonna write synthetic division. Synthetic division.
Wait, what do you know?
We're gonna do synthetic division with this equation and then -3.
Yeah, you said to get -3 because.
Okay, you can do one of two things. You can either plug -3 in for all of those x's and you should get 0 out.
Yeah, but where'd you get -3 from?
Because I know that that's just gonna be the answer. Because I plugged all them in. And I don't wanna plug 5 of them in right now.
Like the X.
Yeah, so if we didn't know, we would have to go and plug in. I mean, you guys are asking excellent questions. I just am being a little lazy, that's why you're not getting it. So let me try again. So if we didn't know, we'd have to do 1 to the 3rd plus 1 squared minus 8 times 1 minus 6. And we multiply that all the way out and solve, and if that did not equal 0, then that would not work.
Okay.
So then I'd say, okay, now we're gonna plug in -1. So then we plug -1 for all of that, and it would still not equal 0. And then we'd be a little annoyed, but then we go try +2, and then that would work, and then we get kind of annoyed, and then we plug -2, and we would have to do that all the way till -3. So because I know the answer, I'm just telling you to go there a little faster. But the next one, it'll go a little quicker, so we'll actually plug them in. Yeah, Millie, does it work? It should, one of these has to work. And on like a quiz or a test, I promise you it will be one of those first 4. Usually it's 1 or -1, because I don't want you to guess all day. But we could sit here, I just am not going to, so. But I'm gonna tell you -3 will work, so we're gonna do our synthetic division, and we should see that my remainder is 0, which means that it works. So I'm gonna go 1, and that gets me -3, so -2, which is 6, which is -2, which is +6, which is 0. If we were just trying, we would know to stop because we were at 0. Now I get to take this new expression, just like we did on those graphing ones earlier, and we're gonna set it into our normal polynomial equation. So it's gonna be x squared minus 2x minus 2. Now, once we've gotten here, we're gonna go back to the beginning of our steps, okay? Now I'm gonna ask myself again, can I factor this? Can you factor this? Oh, thank God, because I didn't want to do a PRRs all over again, right? So now we can factor this. So that's gonna be x, is it -2 and x plus 1? Or did I do that wrong? Oh no, can we factor this? Oh, no. Okay, but don't worry, even though we can't factor it, do you know what else we can do to solve a quadratic formula? Have I lost some of you guys? Okay,
Got me at quadratic.
We didn't lose, we just won.
it's a lot of work. Do you realize that this isn't really hard work? It's just a lot of steps. Like, we haven't done anything too hard, right? We wrote some factors down in a fraction. That wasn't too bad. We did synthetic division. That's not too bad, but it's just evaluating every step. We're always checking. So this one doesn't factor. I might even write no factor, but it does quadratic formula. The hard part, you guys, is that your toolbox in math is just getting bigger and bigger, and that's what's stressful, is it's just not as straightforward anymore. You can do so many things that, like, you have to just like remember, oh, I do know how to quadratic formula, I do know how to factor. So we're gonna go do quadratic formula over here off to the side, okay? So I'll say x equals negative b, so 2 plus or minus b squared minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is negative 2. All over 2 times a. Do that right. All right, then we start simplifying. 2 plus or minus 4. And then I'm gonna multiply these together. Negative 4 times 1 times negative 2 is gonna be positive 8. All over 2. And then we can simplify 4 and 8 to be 12. And then we can go even further because we can simplify that root 12. Plus or minus 2 root 3 over 2. And then now I can cancel, if I have 2 for all 3 of these numbers, 2, 2, 2. I do want that 1 in the front. You do need to keep that 1 as a plus or minus. The 1 in front of the root 3 you don't really need, and then the 1 in the denominator you don't need. Those are redundant, but I do need 1 plus or minus root 3. I'm gonna zoom back out again, just to kind of prove all of the things we did. I know it's a lot of steps. You guys are doing so good. But we tried to factor at the beginning and we couldn't. So then we listed our PRRs. And then I told you which one it was, just to kind of make a little bit less work. We synthetically divided, then we took that new expression and we were able to quadratic formula. We could not factor, and then we were done. So my zeros here, if I were to list all of them together, my zeros are negative 3. Don't forget about that guy. And then 1 plus or minus root 3. If we could, if you could take a factor out, you try to. Just like before, my factors were plus or minus root 2 and 3 x. Okay. Let's do another one. It's gonna be just like this. It's gonna be just about as many steps, okay? We've got one more like this, and then I've got one other tiny scale before we're done for today. Okay. So like we always start with, we try and factor. Can I factor this? No, it's 5 terms. I don't know where to start. I wish I could factor a 5-term thing, but I don't know what to do. So I cannot factor this, okay? My second step, if we go back to our steps, is to look for my PRRs. So let's go list our PRRs. We have plus or minus on top and bottom, and it's my factors of my constant on top. What's my constant in this problem? 8, very good. So what are some numbers that multiply to be 8? Good, and you can put those in whatever order makes you happy. I went 1, 2, 4, and 8. Okay, now I want factors of the leading coefficient and the denominator. What are those? 1, amazing. I'm gonna go one step further to simplify this by putting it all together. Basically, I'm taking each number dividing by 1. So 1 divided by 1 is just 1. 2 divided by 1 is just 2. 4 divided by 1 is just 4, and 8 divided by 1 is just 4. So I know it looks like my next list is just the numerator without the denominator, but when you divide everything by 1, it just stays itself, okay? So this is the list we're gonna go off of. My PRRs, one of these at least is a rational root. And this time I'm not gonna tell you what it is, so we're gonna start with +1. Yes,
It's like an easier way to switch.
this is the shortest way.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's usually it's like a shorter way that you just know by like, I don't know.
So sometimes I'm gonna give you a hint. Sometimes I'm just gonna tell you hint, it's gonna be 1. And then you can just go immediately to 1. But if not, like I'm gonna ask you to list PRRs, I'm gonna ask you to solve all that fun stuff. Okay, so we're gonna plug it in, or we can do synthetic division. It doesn't matter to me. You guys have a preference? Plug in or synthetic to try?
Wait, I thought we plugged that in.
Plug it.
We plug in. Let's plug in first. Okay, so we're gonna plug +1 in.
Wait, it's like, I
What's
thought we have to plug in first in order to do synthetic division.
Right, remember up here with the remainder, you could do synthetic division.
What will be in your box?
Well, in your box, we'll just try 1.
Oh,
So-
that's where you plug in is, okay.
So you could plug it in by doing synthetic division for the
And then
one.
whatever you get, you have to synthetic division again then.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you'd rather just do synthetic division one time, that's great, but sometimes plugging it in is pretty easy, because a lot of times you can just throw this into your calculator. And then just change the x's really easily, so it's not that hard to do that. So this is what I would do if I were to plug it in. I will write it out as well, but if I were to just easily plug it in my calculator. I would make sure to just use a lot of parentheses just so I don't lose anything. So I'll do parentheses 1 raised to the 4th. And then -3 parentheses 1 raised to the 3rd. And then -6 parentheses 1 raised to the 2nd. Plus 6 times 1. And then plus 8. Now, it's kind of a lot right now to make sure everything's in order and everything's tight, but notice that I've got parentheses around all of my x's. So if this doesn't turn out to 0, I can easily like reuse this equation again and plug in a new number, okay? So maybe instead of writing it out, I'll just say plug in. And we tried 1 first. Okay, so when I press enter, I get 6. Now, is that 0? No, so this is not a factor, okay? I can press second, enter, and it's gonna give me what I just typed in. So if you press second, enter, it's gonna give you everything you typed in, and now I can edit it. So see how I'm like moving my little arrow around? I can go put negatives in front of all of these 1s. You may need to put second delete to insert so that it keeps everything in its spot. Second delete will give you a spot to insert, so I'm just making all of those 1s negative. Second delete insert. And so I'm doing still a fair amount of typing, but I'm not retyping it all the way back in, I'm just adding negatives in front of all my 1s. And it worked, thank God. So now my remainder is 0, so that means that -1 worked. That is a factor. So I didn't have to give you a hint, we found that -1 works, okay? So now that I plugged my PRRs in and I see -1 works, do you remember what I do next? Synthetic division, and that -1 goes in my house. That's an 8, yeah. 8s are really hard with this crappy pen. Alright, so now that I have it factored out, now that I have my remainder is 0, we're good. Let's write this as a quadratic, or not a quadratic, but a polynomial expression. So I get x to the third minus 4x squared minus 2x plus 8. Remember at this step, now I go back to the beginning and I look back at my first step, and my first step says factor. Can I factor this? I actually think I can. Let's see if we can do our grouping here. And I'm gonna move it just so I can have a little bit more space to write it.
Wait, don't we need a major?
Don't we need a remainder? Your remainder should be 0.
Oh,
Because it should divide evenly. Which is actually good, because I don't think we can divide if there's a remainder. And plus 8. So we'll do our grouping. Got x squared, x minus 4. And take a negative 2 out, and I got x minus 4, amazing. And then once I factor that out, let's set each of those factors equal to 0, and then I am for real done. X squared minus 2 equals 0, and then x minus 4 equals 0. I mean, my calculator, so I'm gonna get rid of that.
This is my next presentation.
Yes, stuff like this will be on your next quiz. Now my zeros here are -1, plus or minus root 2 and 4. I know, your brain's about to explode. I want to do one more tiny thing before we're done for today, though.
we have one more.
Yeah. I'm gonna give the next class 2 homeworks on the same day, so I'm trying to give you guys an extra day to do your homework, so. Hopefully that'll be good. Okay, questions on what we've done so far? Okay, the last thing that I'm okay doing with, because it's just so easy, all we're gonna do is synthetic division. So these say show that 3 is an upper bound, show that -4 is a lower bound. This is really not important. This is something Mrs. Ludington and I are probably gonna cut out of the test and the quiz, but it's just easy synthetic division practice, so we're gonna do it together, okay? So when we are seeing a problem that talks about bounds, upper bound or lower bound, we are gonna do synthetic division, okay? It says show that 3 is that bound, so 3 is the number that goes in my house, okay? So let's go ahead and synthetically divide, and then when you're done, we'll look up, because there's gonna be a pattern that I want us to notice. So we'll put 3 in our house, put your coefficients 2, -4, 1, -2. I don't even need to rewrite this as a polynomial expression, okay? All that matters is this, the numbers on the bottom, okay? We did our synthetic division. Notice that all of these numbers are positive, +2, +2, +7, +19. When they're all positive, that makes it an upper bound. So all positive numbers when we do our synthetic division equals an upper bound. The next one's a lower bound, so it's gonna be a different pattern, okay? And these problems say show that, which means that I know that it's an upper bound, I know it's a lower bound. I'm just showing you what tells me that. So the fact that those are all positive made it an upper bound. We're gonna do synthetic division again on number 7. We should see a different pattern, okay? Let's find out. It's still gonna be a lower bound, and I'm gonna argue it's because it's not going to be all negative this time. Good, it's because it alternates, so it goes positive, negative, positive, negative. Cause that last one's gonna be negative, what, 191? So if you notice, this time I've got a positive, then a negative, then I have a positive, then I have a negative. So lower bound means that they alternate signs, so I'm gonna say alternate signs equals a lower bound. We're doing so well, we're just really falling apart here at the end. Oh, yeah, Millie.
What if, like, the matter was like, positive, negative, negative?
Great question. If it does something that's not all positive and not alternating signs, it's just not a bound. Good question. All right, you have homework on 2-4. I believe I see you on Wednesday, so let's try and get that done for Wednesday, and then we'll see how much at 2-5 we can get done.
And then it's like,
Yeah.
will you be here Wednesday morning?
Say it one more time.
Will you be here Wednesday morning?
Yep.
Office.
Yep, that works.
Should I take this?
Office hours or resource? Wednesday, yeah, let's do that. Wednesday's a day 4, so that's C period. Yeah, you come in here.
But I take it like. Sorry.
You do office hours, Wednesday. If we're missing any other quizzes or tests, let's try and get those cleaned up this week, okay, guys? We can stop this.